good evening, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for watching online on JMU TV. My name is Maury Piperl. It's my pleasure and privilege to be the Dean of the School of Business here at George Mason University for the last 4.5 years. I want to welcome you all to our Brown & Brown Speaker Series, first event for this academic year and this calendar year. With their support over the last 13 years, Brown & Brown has sponsored our community-based initiative here, which is all about educating but also connecting our students and our wider stakeholders with the business world and with the practitioners who are helping us to develop and indeed change it for the better. In particular, our region's business community, and our speaker this evening has had a lot of experience in this region. We're really fortunate that the Brown & Brown Distinguished Speaker Series brings together a group of diverse corporate leaders and government officials from a variety of backgrounds to discuss strategic issues, operational issues, things that are critical to our nation's ability to sustain and enhance our competitive edge in a global economy through all its twists and turns. I want to thank our guests tonight, but I'm going to ask our wonderful sponsor, Bill Strachan, who's president of Brown & Brown Insurance of Virginia, to welcome Richard and tell us about him. So, Bill, if you'd be so kind, thank you so much for your longstanding support.
So I will echo the Dean's comments. It is so nice to see you all here. It's been 2 years since we've done this without it being on Zoom. So, man, I'm really glad that that's the case. I'm really happy to be here. Just a little bit about Brown & Brown. Brown & Brown is a publicly traded broker, insurance broker, with about 12,000 teammates. That's what we refer to our folks as, all around the country and the world. And the thing that we do that is a little different, or I should say a lot different than our competitors, is we want to be very, very involved in our community. Many of our best clients started out as an entrepreneur with one person literally in the garage, like you've heard about, and now they're Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 companies. So I'm just very privileged to be here. As the Dean said, 13 years goes by fast. We've had some really great speakers through our tenure here. And tonight you will not be disappointed, I can guarantee you, with who you're going to hear from tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about our speaker tonight. I want to introduce Richard Bynum. Richard currently is Chief Corporate Responsibility Officer for the PNC Financial Services Group. Richard leads the PNC Foundation, the Community Affairs and Corporate Social Responsibility, Community Development Banking, and Diversity and Inclusion. And in addition, he is leading the implementation of PNC's $1 billion commitment to help end systematic racism and support the economic empowerment of African Americans and low to moderate income communities. Richard is an accomplished executive with nearly 20 years of executive leadership experience. Prior to being named to his new role in July of 2020, he served as the regional president for PNC's Greater Washington market from 17 through 20. Richard previously served as a member of PNC's retail executive leadership team, where he led the business banking division. Prior to that, he served as the Greater Washington retail market executive from 2010 to 2014, where he led consumer and small business sales. Prior to joining PNC, Richard had a 12-year career as a senior manager for the American Red Cross. He's recognized as one of Washington, D.C.'s most influential business leaders by the Washington Business Journal and serves on the boards of numerous nonprofit and civic organizations. Richard holds an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at the Northwestern University and an undergraduate degree in political science from Florida State. He also is a graduate of the Consumers Bankers Association Graduate School of Retail Bank Management. As you can tell, he's a busy person. And so we're very, very grateful to have him here. Richard.
Now you notice that Richard didn't go to the podium and pull out a bunch of lecture notes because we thought the way it might make most sense to run this session, particularly given the crazy stressful environment that we've all been living in recently, is more as a relaxed conversation. But I assure you, having seen him lead such relaxed conversations before, it will not be short on content. So if we can start, and by the way, before I get into the conversation, for those of you watching on the TV channel, there will be a place to put your comments and questions, and then we will get to, in about 45, 50 minutes, we'll get to the questions from both online and in the audience. So there's lots of time and place here to participate. But let me, if you'd be so kind, just ask you to start by telling us a little bit about what you think this new role means, and yes, for you and for PNC, but also the bigger principles that are associated with it as we are particularly attuned to here at Mason.
Sure, happy to. But first, thank you all for coming out. It's great to be among people. It's great for those who are here with us to join and commune together. And for the folks at home, obviously, hopefully we will live up to your expectations as well. So I took on this role as Chief Corporate Responsibility Officer. It's been about a year and a half ago. And just for a moment, I'll take you back to a year and a half ago. Right? So a year and a half ago, actually just about 2 years ago this time, we were all going home. We were all going to try to live through what we thought was going to be a few weeks of the pandemic, right? And what that meant. We didn't really know. What it meant for me was figuring out how to help run a bank of some 50,000 employees and several million customers from home bases. And so we spent a lot of time doing just that. But as we now all know, during the summer of 2020, we were confronted with another set of issues that led to unrest in the streets, that led to civil disobedience, that led to protest. And in seeing that, I think through the screens that we had all become accustomed to, it was somehow amplified, right? The issues that were on those screens somehow mirrored to all of us something that had to be done, something that had to be said. And I don't think that changed whether you were a student or a corporate leader. And in fact, for our CEO, it absolutely didn't change. And so our CEO, Bill Demchak, called me and some other folks together and really kind of said, look, this is a time when I don't think anyone can be silent, and it's a time where I think companies have to step up and have an approach that's thoughtful, that's within our values, that touches our constituents, our employees, our customers, our communities, and our shareholders. And I want you to help me think about what that might be. And that became ultimately this $1 billion commitment to help challenge systemic racism affecting the Black community and low to moderate income communities. And so we did that. We made that commitment. And then as things go, I was sitting at home. I was going to take a little bit of a vacation after several weeks of pretty intensive conversation, both internally and externally, about what that meant to our employees, what that meant to the communities where we operate. And I got a phone call from our CEO. Now, as a former now regional president, I would talk to our CEO a couple of times a year. That was pretty standard. But it usually wasn't at 5 o'clock on a Monday afternoon. As we began to talk, I began to wonder, what's the purpose of this conversation? And what I came to realize is that the purpose was he was asking me to take on a new job and to become part of our executive committee and to take on what would be a new role at PNC. And what he said to me at the time and in the subsequent months I really learned is, I'm going to need to really shape not only this role, but how we're going to execute against this commitment. This is a pretty heady thing for a company to do. And a company our size, we are a large bank. We actually got a little bit larger, and I'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a second. But we're not the entire financial services industry. We're not the entirety of corporate America. What can we in fact do? And when you're confronted with a topic like systemic racism, $1 billion just isn't a lot of money, candidly. But we could do some things. There was impact that we could have, and we wanted to bring that to life. So that's what it meant for our company. That's how we arrived at this place. I think what it meant for the larger construct that is corporate America is that for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, I'm guessing for the lifetime of a lot of folks in our audience, you had something beyond just government really being looked to make a statement and to make an impact on social issues in our country. And to do so not just as a marketing campaign, but to really be held accountable to having impact. And when you think about it, it's pretty simple, right? All companies are people who come together and to try to achieve a set of outcomes. And yes, in many cases, that's for a profit, right? You want to make a profit so that you can create jobs and you can amass a good life for the families who are represented by those employees. You also want to take care of your customers. You want to take care of your shareholders, and yes, you want to return on investment for those shareholders. But the social good that you can do is important too. And how can you think about within a set of values, direct that social good to some benefit for those communities where you work, where you operate, that are important, in fact, to the markets that you serve. And I think that this time, will be looked back on as really when that came to a head. It wasn't long before the pandemic that the Business Roundtable, which is, the largest companies in America, the CEOs, sort of came together and arrived at that conclusion.
Now, they also had a statement, was it in 2019, that was about more generally corporate responsibility to the world.
Yeah. It was, and how that sort of manifested itself through time is through something called ESG, or environmental, social, or societal, and governance. And I'm guessing we're going to traipse on that topic here in a little while. That is a responsibility in my function as well, to manage and help manage our company in a way that's environmentally responsible, socially responsible, and that we have governance so that it's not purely just the employees, it's not purely just the management team, but it's also governed by our board of directors, who are a representation of our shareholders. And that is, in fact, the number one issue on the minds of investors around the world, and certainly in the country, and we spend a great deal of time talking about it.
Yeah, and it's been going on for some years, I presume.
It has. It's evolved, quite honestly. I would say over the last 10, 15 years, you heard corporate social responsibility. You heard many companies begin to produce reports talking about all of the good that they've done in the world. But more recently, it's gotten into a discussion about, don't just tell me the marketing message around the good, really show me how you as an entity are making the world a better place by virtue of your position in it. And that's a conversation driven by investors. In fact, one of the largest investors in the world, BlackRock, Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, really drives a conversation, and he has the influence to drive a lot of investors to think very deeply about how they are investing their money, and is it being done in a socially responsible way?
Trillions of dollars, yeah.
Trillions of dollars,
yeah. I'm remembering, just showing my age, the movement probably 25 years ago toward what was referred to as triple bottom line reporting. But that wasn't driven by shareholders, was it? That was investors. That was driven by employees and by, I think, young persons.
Yeah, I think it was driven by employees generally. I think it was also driven by a want to connect your brand with good versus just profit, right? So are we, in fact, doing something good? But more and more now, when we think about what drives us, certainly investors drive us, right? There's no doubt about that. But employees play a big role. I think an even larger role today than they played 2 years ago, than they played 4 years ago, insofar as the generations and what's important to them are changing. I think, one of the things we had opportunity to grab dinner before we joined you all today, and one of the things we were talking about was the Great Reset, or Great Resignation, or Great, you come up with the word for it. But it's effectively how the labor market is communicating to employers about what's important to them and what they're willing to do in order to demonstrate that importance and really change, their outcome, their lot in life, whatever that might be. And what we know in talking to our employees, what we know from countless surveys, is that it's not just about the dollars and the cents. Now, it is about the dollars and the cents too, don't get me wrong. But it's not just about that. Professionals today, people who go to work today want to have a pride in what they're doing, not just the output that they provide, but pride in what the company that they work for is actually doing, whether or not it's creating a social good, not just, again, a connection of brand to good outcomes, but actually participating in making this community a better place. And I think that probably started with, a word that, I don't really use too much anymore, millennials. You go back 15, 20 years ago when we started talking about millennials entering the workforce, you thought that their thoughts and insights about their job and their place in the world were going to be different than the current generation, and that's true, they were. What's true also is now those folks who entered the workforce 10, 15, 20 years ago, they're now the managers of those employers, right? They've moved up in the company, and they're directing their talents and energies and their insights toward a different direction.
No, I think that's true. In fact, I will just put a pitch for some of us here at Mason at the School of Business working on this question about purpose, about careers. Careers have been my subject of research for a long, long time. I still don't understand it, but it's fascinating. We had a piece in HR Dive last week on, in fact, this question of purpose, not just about Great Resignation, but it's kind of I think you said realignment. We are having to connect at a deeper level. Companies are having to connect at a deeper level with the people that are going to actually create the value, make the company happen, take it into the future, because the sense that people have maybe always had, but has really kind of gone from, past that inflection point, I think, on the S-curve, is we want not to be just doing, working to live, and we're not going to sign up just to live to work, but some way of pulling work and life into alignment so that we do things that we believe are really worth doing for a purpose.
Yeah, purpose-driven. Yeah. Living and working a kind of a purpose-driven life has become a central theme of this workforce. Now, I will say, because I'm a banker, that there's a business cycle, right? And right now, I think we even through pandemic, hopefully, knock on wood, somewhat behind us, and there are, certainly opportunities for this marketplace to continue to kind of grow. There's a lot of looming storm clouds out there, and we can afford that purpose, and I hope that we always will be able to afford that purpose. But I do believe in the business cycle, and I do know that things do ebb and do flow, and so I think people have to have a holistic sense of what brings them purpose and use that set of virtues and values to guide them throughout their career. Because, through my lens, when I think about the company, one of the first things I'll ask when we talk about, a deal we're going to do, or we talk about a process or something we're going to change is how do we connect that to our values? We have a number of values. They're not just up on a wall. We use those values. We think about them routinely when we make decisions. They come into the conversation. How does it connect to teamwork? How does this connect to diversity and inclusion? What about performance? What about customer focus? And I think that people have to do something similar to that. And if you're not doing something that's connected with your values, then you should go on and do something else.
Yeah. And I think what I hear you saying is you also have to look at the big picture of what works. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Again, a conversation we were having earlier, I think you have to think through the entire equation. I mean, there are pieces and parts to, environmental, social, and governance strategies that are unidimensional. And that's fine, because what we're talking about is our planet. What we're talking about is the societal ills of the world. What we're talking about is making sure that corporate America does the thing that it is capable of doing in its best self. But you can't take any of those as discrete notions. There are intersections that occur between every single issue that you might want to describe in that framework. And you can't forget that, because if you do, you're just going to create collateral damage across the spectrum of what is a community, what is humanity.
No, that's fascinating. I want to get a little bit later to the question of advice for the students and for the alumni and the others that are watching tonight. But from where you sit in this new role that you've now kind of fleshed out and figured out, what are most of the pieces. I assume it's probably still changing a bit. But what's, what have you found to be, well, both on the one hand, like falling off a log, we should have done this years ago, and on the other hand, what's hard?
There's so many things. I think one of the things that I'll probably pull on here is that this stuff is hard. If it were easy, we probably would have done it a long time ago. There's a market for it. And right now, because, many of the things that I touch on are really issues that are capturing, the imagination of all of our constituents, there's not a lot of patience for, well, we have a plan, right? One of the things...
But you have to have one.
But you have to have a plan. But, as I often say, you're sort of building this car as you're driving it down the road. That is a must. That's the only way that anything gets done nowadays. So as an example, our commitment has evolved. Kind of continue telling the story. So after Bill and I discussed taking on this role and giving some form and function to executing against this $1 billion effort, it wasn't a month later that I walked into, well, I didn't walk, I turned on Zoom for one of our executive committee meetings, and I found out we were going to buy a bank. And so we decided to make a pitch to buy BBVA USA. And if you're familiar with BBVA USA, you'll know that they were a subsidiary of a Spanish bank, and that they were primarily located in the southwest of the United States. A terrific complement to our business. An opportunity for us to take our franchise coast to coast. So we operate in California, we operate in Florida, we operate in Boston, and we operate in the great Pacific Northwest now. And
headquarters still in Pittsburgh.
With our headquarters is in Pittsburgh.
Which is where it kind of started to play out.
Absolutely. Started as a combination of two banks, PNB, Pittsburgh National Bank, and Provident Bank in Philadelphia years and years and years ago. So when we decided to do that, I immediately knew that my job just got more interesting, because now I wasn't talking about an episode that would take us 3 years to execute against deploying that type of capital. I was talking about something a bit more strategic that would literally touch every community in the United States. Today we are in the top 50 markets in the United States across the country. And so we began to organize our thoughts about, again, building the cars we drive down the road. One, how do we live up to this commitment that we've made in 2021, right? We're not going to stop. We declared that we were going to begin to deploy that capital in 2021, and we were absolutely going to do that. But we had to have a mind toward this broader, more strategic conversation that we were having. So data on systemic racism and more importantly, the root gaps that are associated with that, be it the housing gap, the education gap, the wealth gap, you name it, are readily available. So I didn't need to do like a lot of primary research on the topic. You just go out and Google it, and you literally come back with, kind of all of the gaps that are apparent. And one of the things that we quickly arrived at is that there were really 3 areas that were likely to be at the root of some of those gaps that we as a bank could affect some change, some impact in. One was entrepreneurship. Another was education, and yet another was economic empowerment. And so those were the very simple framework that we began to think about. Okay, we're going to deploy our capital and our philanthropic support through those 3 things. And so today, as we sit here, we ended up deploying $375 million against that original billion commitment in 2021, rooted in those three principles. To give you an example of some deals, I'll give you one close to home, I'll give you one a little further away. If you live in and around D.C., you might be familiar with Ward 7 and 8 in Washington, D.C. East of the Anacostia River, population's 92% African American. The poverty rate sits somewhere around 18%. The unemployment rate at the time that I pulled these stats in my head was something around double the national average of the time. So this is a year plus ago. And in many cases, fresh foods and groceries is somewhat of a challenge to access. They're not on every corner like they might be in Northern Virginia as a counterpoint. There's a development in Ward 7 called Skyland that required funding to bring a national grocery store chain to the project and would create about 116 construction jobs and over time more than 100 retail jobs for both the grocer and the sundry retail around it. And they were short. And so we deployed about $9 million in a loan and about $4.5 million of equity capital, which I can do under the auspice of this part of our balance sheet that we set aside. And we deployed it, and we matched the capital that was raised by the developer, and they broke ground on Skyland last fall, and they are beginning to bring that grocery store chain, which will be Lidl, to that community. So that's one example, right? How we were able to focus in on a particular set of issues and drive a change in a largely African American community. Another example in Chicago. We set aside $1.5 million in a micro equity injection fund for small business owners. So you had to earn less than $1 million in annual revenues. We focused it on the south and west sides of Chicago, partnered with the mayor's office there, and created a micro equity fund, and ended up supporting about 1,000 small business owners in that fund. We felt good about it, so we did it again in Milwaukee as well. So through the balance of last year, we did 223 deals like that across the United States and deployed about $375 million in capital. In addition to that, we deployed about $35 million in philanthropic support on a variety of things, one of which is actually with a sister business school in the area. So I'll
Can't imagine.
I'll acknowledge that. And created the Howard University PNC Bank National Center for Entrepreneurship. So Howard will aid in creating not only a center on Howard's campus, and this is, I think, why Howard was important to the equation, but in partnership with three other historically black colleges, Morgan State, Clark Atlanta, Texas Southern University, and Clark Atlanta University, will create curricula for all 101 historically black colleges and universities over the life of this 5-year arrangement. So that's the good we did. That's sort of flying the plane. So now let's talk a little bit about building it as we go down the road. So again, we recognize that we would have to have a more strategic view than our $1 billion commitment. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't drive it, but that the communities that we would operate in drove it. And so we reached out. Fortunately, we have, I think, a very good brand, certainly in this market and other markets as well. We touched hundreds of community housing agencies, small business advocates, folks who were just working hard at building community and low to moderate income communities around the country. And the good news for me is that, during a pandemic, I can be in 30 cities in 2 weeks, right? Versus hopping on a plane. So we had a bunch of Zoom calls, but they were really, really impactful Zoom calls. And we really only asked one question. So out of this assembled group of folks, we said, what could a bank of our size do in your community that would be valuable? And what we heard didn't surprise us, but the scale did. So what we heard was affordable housing is the number one issue in every community across the country from Miami to California, period, probably times 4 against any other issue we heard. So we knew we had to do something about housing. The second issue was that small business, as an important driver of job creation in this country and economic creation in communities of color and in low to moderate income communities, had been hurt badly by the pandemic. So just a stat, 41% of all black-owned small business in the first year of the pandemic had to close. So you're talking about, nearly half of all small businesses driving job creation and economic progress in those communities. So we had to do something with small business. Third, we heard, you guys are pretty good at community development. In fact, that's why we took the phone call. Keep doing that good thing, and in fact, do more of that. And so we knew we had to think about commitments that we had made, and we had to expand those. So here's what we did. So last, I guess it was April, I announced, along with our CEO and our executive team, that we would make a 4-year, $88 billion community benefits plan with $47 billion set aside for the provision of housing in the form of mortgages, in the form of preservation capital to preserve homes, keep people in the places where they live, and home equity loans and products. $26.5 billion for small businesses, and $14.5 billion, including taking the $1 billion commitment that we'd originally made and expanding it now to $1.5 billion over 4 additional years. So we started that community benefits plan this January for $1.5 billion. So again, 47 for housing, 26.5 for small business, 14.5 for community development. And so those numbers are big, right? And those numbers are important numbers. But we also wanted to make sure that we got it to the right places. So for each of those first 2 tranches, both the housing, affordable housing dollars and the small business dollars, our targets will be communities of color, low to moderate income communities, and or borrowers of color, right? And we'll be measuring and reporting on our progress against those goals and those sub-goals. For community development, that by definition is in low to moderate income communities. So the expansion will be over $1.5 billion for targeting the Black community specifically, but we'll also be including in that public finance as well as our tax credit business. And so that was fairly well received. And so then we spent the balance of the year, again, building the car as we're driving down the road, while we were deploying that $375 million, reconfiguring some of the people, process, and products in-house so that we could feel comfortable that we'd be able to deliver that.
No, this is brilliant. And the fascinating thing, considering the kind of bigger picture of what does corporate responsibility mean, is that if I understand correctly, this is not about, doing a different kind of business or simply, putting money into not-for-profit efforts. This is about banking that is sort of targeted or ring-fenced or what have you toward important causes, but it's still banking. I mean, so I'm on the board of a small community bank here, and the community banks are, of course, regulated by the Fed to make sure that they are doing some of what you are describing. But the bigger banks, maybe, is the case, is less so? I mean,
well, no. I mean, we're all regulated, and we're all subject to the Community Reinvestment Act, right? So the Community Reinvestment Act has been around now for 60-plus years. Banks receive a variety of ratings, ranging from complete failure to outstanding. PNC has enjoyed an outstanding rating for 40 years. And it was put in place because of the ills of the past. If you've ever read the book called The Color of Money,
yes, indeed,
you'll know about policies from the government, from the system, to redline certain neighborhoods and devalue those neighborhoods and make it very difficult for them to access capital through time. So we have a commitment as a bank. If you want to have a bank charter, you want to hang out a charter as a bank, you have to adhere to the Community Reinvestment Act. And right now, actually, the regulators in Congress and others are looking at a revitalization of the Community Reinvestment Act. And so we're eager to see what comes from that. But the bottom line is that's table stakes.
Yeah.
Right? So that's been true for 40 years. And yet, remember how I started the conversation. I Googled what the gaps were, right? And in Googling what the gaps were, they still were there, even after 40 years. And so we'll do that. We'll do the Community Reinvestment Act. We'll do every place we have a branch, we have to make sure that we have the products and the services and the capital deployed for individuals in low to moderate income communities. And we will do all that because we have. Now, what else are we going to do, right? And how are we going to make sure that to the degree that one bank making one commitment over a finite period of time can help close a gap, then that's what we ought to be about doing. And by the way, every constituent that we talked to about this, our employees said, yes, do it, do more. Our customers said, that's great. I want to buy from a company that thinks that way. The communities, obviously, we engage them in order to aggregate and come up with the plan altogether. Sure. And our shareholders have rewarded us because they look at what we're doing, and if you are doing well by doing good in the environment that we find ourselves in, and frankly that we will as we go forward, then you're rewarded for that largesse.
Okay, it sounds great, and I guess the big question then for business students, for business world generally is, how do you take that wonderful example and apply it, beyond banking, and into industry X and company Y or startup Z or whatever it is? How do you view this or do you view this as a sort of a gradual shift, like the Business Roundtable is trying to indicate, in how businesses judge their success?
I think you do, right? Again, number one issue for investors, number one issue for boards around the country is this practice of ESG. If you're a startup, if you're working for a company, there will be a time when either you or someone will come knocking on your door to ask you about what you're doing and how is it socially responsible. I'll give you sort of maybe a real world answer. We talked a little bit about this over dinner as well. If you're a tech firm today and you're creating a wonderful new product, right? It's your responsibility to make sure that product does no harm to people just because you thought about the average consumer that was going to consume your product. That's your responsibility. I'm not a tech executive, so I don't know a whole lot about the business, but I've read case studies about things like facial recognition software, and we recently saw the IRS, as an example, pull a plan to include facial recognition in their process. Now, I'm not saying the reason why they did it was because some facial recognition software over time has been shown to not deal well with those who are complected like I am, but it probably had something to do with it, right? So if if you've got a great idea, that's awesome. One of the things that I'm most sure about as I sit here today is that the country is literally full of great ideas right now. We are at a very exciting time. You thought that, the internet, right, was an exciting time. I think we're at actually a more...
Is it over?
Well, I think you're at a more potentially exciting time now in terms of what technology can do. But make no mistake about it, it can also do some pretty bad things, right? An algorithm run amok can ruin people's lives. So I think if you've got a great idea, you have to ask yourself the question, all right, well, this is a great idea, but have I looked at it from each and every angle? And now here's the magnificent thing. So the way to solve that is through diversity, right? So if you have a portfolio of stocks, right, where you put your cash, one of the first things that people will talk to you about is, okay, well, is your portfolio diversified? Why do they talk to you about your portfolio being diversified? Because Diversification manages out the risk that you're taking. You can take, an appropriate amount of risk to get an appropriate amount of reward. And diversity is the only free lunch you get. Well, guess what? It's the only free lunch you get in this conversation too. So if you have a diverse set of views in a room that pressure test ideas, even good ones, to the point that through their experience they bring value to the table, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you have that diverse set to manage your risk out, right? So I do think that there's this sort of complementary set of functions that are at work in business today. That if you're a business school student, when I was a business school student, there weren't classes on this stuff, but there were conversations about it. And I think the conversations that you have in groups and with professors and the rest ought to be pressure tested against this real world that's out here as well, because it's expecting that they will be.
Yeah, and as often happens, there's research on it, has been for quite a while. But sometimes our research doesn't really get out to see the light of day because we're not necessarily making sure that it gets to the right audiences. But yes, I had the pleasure of teaching for many years in Europe, global groups, including some global banks. And the thing that was very clear is when you're running an organization across many different places, the sheer diversity of views, languages, cultures, demographics, histories from the people in those different places could give you tremendous advantages, not only in risk reduction, but in idea generation, if you were able to really harness it. But
Sure,
that only worked if you could do it in a purposeful, relatively non-hierarchical, which is something we struggle with in America.
Sure.
And not just America.
But without a doubt. But I will tell you, and the data is clear on this, and you I'm sure know this, and others know this as well. The most high-performing teams are diverse.
Yeah.
You can go look at the data, and you can pressure test it 9 ways from Sunday. If you take a completely homogeneous team and you put them against a team that is 100% diverse, the diverse team will get the better outcome nearly 100% of the time.
Yeah, and the only times that it doesn't, no, you're absolutely right. The only times that it doesn't are if the task is so well known and has been around for years and isn't changing.
Right.
And you all kind of come from the same place, so you clicked together and learned it early. Right.
Right.
But that fewer and
That
fewer.
never happens.
Right, exactly. And the other is if the diverse team is not managed well and therefore kind of is splitting and not gelling together.
Yeah, group dynamics, play a role. And by the way, it's harder. It's harder. So we have I think we do a decent job around the notion of acquiring a diverse group of talent. Our problem, and maybe the problem of a lot of companies, is keeping talent, right? And we have a lot of programs and supports in to try to keep our talent diverse or not at PNC to grow their careers there. But management plays a really important role. And the group dynamic plays an important role because managing a diverse team is actually harder in many cases because you actually have to be inclusive to a variety of points of view. If there are, sort of favorite children in every conversation and we always head in one direction in every conversation, then the folks who are around that table, diverse or no, are going to say, well, I don't want to be around this table anymore because no one ever listens to my ideas. That's right. And then they'll go somewhere else. And by the way, then you'll lose.
Yeah, and if you're a manager, you don't always know that that's happening. You have to ask, you have to look, you have to, reach out.
It was interesting. So I'll go back to 2020 for just a second, I promise. After the murder of George Floyd and we had Ahmaud Arbery's name and Breonna Taylor's name and other names added to a long list of names, but really the country was galvanized around what was going on and what were the underlying issues with regard to it. We had a lot of deep conversations in the company, and what we arrived at the conclusion of was that managers are pretty uncomfortable traipsing into topics that are not familiar to them. As it turns out, it took us a while to figure that out. We should have known that, from the start. So what we did was we actually empowered some of the folks who were being led to help lead their managers, and that's okay. And it's okay to be uncomfortable. And the only thing that's not okay to do is to pretend that none of that is actually going on, right? If you go to work every day and you pretend that there are things that are not going on outside of your work or how your colleague got to work. We had an occasion where a fairly senior leader in the company was talking to another fairly senior leader in the company. One happened to be white, one happened to be black. And as it turned out, the black employee, for their own reasons, and I understand them, every day when they drove to work and from work, they put their wallet on their dashboard. Just a practice that they had gotten into for most of their adult life. And in talking with their white colleague, the white colleague was flabbergasted. Like, why would you do that? There's no reason that I've never heard of such a thing. And a conversation happened, right? And the light bulb went off in the white colleague's eyes about the fact that this African-American colleague came to work every day having put their wallet back into their pocket to walk into the building, and how many times during a given day they had to alter themselves just to get through the day, right? And if you think about that for a second, how many times do you have to check yourself as you go through an 8 to 10 hour day? And how can you perform at an optimal level when so many calories are being placed on just making micro adjustments every single day, right? If you think about that for even a minute and you live in that world, it's pretty easy to get why people just go, you know what, I'd rather go do something else.
Yeah, and I remember this opening question in a leadership seminar, and the instructor looked at the group and said, "How many of you have thought about your race today?" And all the white people would go, "What are you talking about?" Yeah, because sure. Wow. I wanted to come to a little bit to George Washington, not University, I wanted to go to Washington, D.C., and I wanted to go to Mason because we first connected as you were leading some of the conversations around Washington. Richard, as you know, was the market president for PNC in the region, including just after, and I think also during some of the local acquisitions, right? I mean, you were building it.
I was here, so when we entered Washington in 2005, we acquired Riggs Bank. Shortly after that, we acquired a bank called Mercantile Bank, and Mercantile was actually a bank of sort of Baltimore and the Eastern Shore, but they had some suburban Maryland and Virginia locations, and that's largely what comprised PNC here in this market. And then during the time that I was here, we then acquired Royal Bank of Canada's holdings in the Southeast. And just before I came here, National City, which was really would kind of double the size of our company and took us from being a pretty decent size but mid-Atlantic player to kind of a scale player.
With kind of deep embedded history, of course, Riggs, you know, the grand DC bank from ages ago. My grandmother's, you know, and so we were talking about the development of the Washington region, and Richard actually had hosted this conversation with Ted Leontis, who has a kind of a dream about Washington becoming a truly global city.
Yeah.
And the challenges of having the different pieces linked together. And at Mason, we have the challenge of being present in the Washington area, but being of Virginia, all of Virginia, plus or minus. And but you said to me, you know, I really think Mason has the potential to be a dominant force or something like that. And I'm just curious what you know, what the, if you don't mind me asking you yet again.
Not at all, no. And I remember the conversation. I'll try to do it justice. So you got to think about the timing, right? So this was probably 2018.
Yeah, 18, 19.
Amazon was a gleam in the eye of the region, right? We didn't know if we had landed Amazon yet. There were a lot of tells, a lot of suggestions that, in fact, Northern Virginia would be the place. And you know, I think we think about it now, and we think about it through the haze of pandemic. We'll work our way out of that. But that is an economic, you know, moonshot for any region. but you put that moonshot on top of a region that had its own growth opportunities without Amazon, and it's an amazing, amazing event. And then to have that in Northern Virginia, right, where, again, 2018 at the time, you're not talking about a particularly crowded field and a regional infrastructure, so not only are you carrying the potential student population of Northern Virginia, but frankly, you know, I can make a case that I'd go from DC to Northern Virginia. I can make a case I'd come from suburban Maryland, even Baltimore, to come to Northern Virginia for a great education. So I thought, you know, at the time when we had the conversation, boy, you're sitting right in the epicenter of a lot of cool stuff that could happen. And then now fast forward, it did happen. And what happened after it? You have a lot of new market entrants, right? But you're here. You're here in a sort of crowning area. You're expanding into places that all of your constituents are. You have a brand that is Northern Virginia. I mean, you know, honestly, there's some other players, I guess, around Northern Virginia now that don't have a brand that's Northern Virginia. Someone said University of Kentucky to me a little while ago, and I thought, really? Wow, in Northern Virginia, okay. But, I mean, so I think still now the realization of those opportunities is here. And yes, we've had pandemic, and no, we're not quite out of the woods yet, but we're on our way. And so I think there's huge hope and promise of what Mason can be to this, you know, to this epicenter. This place is primed to grow like very few other places in the country right now. In fact, I hesitate to even throw one out there because they all sort of have some problems, but there's some of those issues really aren't here. Right at the moment, and it's an exciting place to be.
I really appreciate that, and you're right. I mean, you can be really good at things and work hard and all the rest of it, but it also really matters what context you're in, where you are.
Yeah.
So we have seen in higher education this school year in undergraduate numbers in the country, they're down about 1 million people, but not at Mason. You know, we're more or less level, a little bit down, a little bit up, depending on what school you look at. But that is not happening to us, at least not yet. And
I
so,
think,
you know,
and I am not in higher ed. I'm not in, so take what I say with something of a grain of salt. But I think this probably ebbs and flows with the business cycle, right? So, you know, right now, you don't need a degree. You don't need those kinds of things. You just go out and opportunities around every corner. Business cycle comes. Right? And now you're in a place where, you know, interest rates are higher, costs of capital are higher, companies are having to pay a lot more attention to that expense line versus just the revenue line. Margins are shrinking, right? Well, maybe we can do it with 2 people instead of 5 people, right? And then all of a sudden it's like retool, reskill. And where's a great place to reskill? College or university or business school. And so I think, you know, I've been working now for, 30 plus years. I think I've seen it now more times in the last 15 than in the first 15, but I'm pretty sure I'll see it again.
Interesting. So, which takes us to, you know, what advice do you have for our students, our friends, in thinking about those issues, and back to the, you know, anything from the purpose issues to the kind of, you know, looking ahead versus how much you can versus can't plan, to these questions of education, et cetera. And we'll open it in a moment for questions, but anything you want to offer just by way of initial advice?
Yeah, for students, business school students, undergrad, graduate, what have you, now is a great time to lean in. Do not lean out, okay? You can make a career right now. You can be the person who is eager to learn. You can be the person who is asking for more. You can be the person who is willing to take a risk and do something that you don't know anything about. And that firepower will fuel the next 15 years of your career, right? Or you could be the person that says, well, you know, I want to live right there. I never want to live any place but right there. So if there's any other opportunity and it's not right there, I'm not going to take it. You could be the person that says, well, I don't want to really do that. You know, I really like to do this kind of very narrow thing. And if you can't really do anything for me, I know someone else who's going to hire me, and they're going to, guess what? They're going to pay me more. Okay. I think you have to, in a career, especially in a career just sort of after school, really take a very long view. You're going to be working for a long time. Like I said, I've worked about 30 years. I've got a few more years ahead of me. You're going to be working for a long time. It is not a short game. And I think you have to play it as a long game. I think there are things that you can tell yourself, write them down on a piece of paper about your long and your short-term goals, about your personal and professional aspirations that will serve you really, really well, not now, but 6 months from now, not 6 months from now, but 2 years from now, if you reflect back on those things and can use them to provide your future self some advice. But it's a long game. You know, as a young person, and by young person I would define anybody, you know, sort of 35 or younger, you know, recognize that it is in fact a long game. Recognize that, you know, people are paying attention even when you don't think they are. Recognize that opportunity often happens when you're not in the room. In fact, 100% of the time it happens when you're not in the room. And the only thing that will be in the room representing you is what you've produced and what others have seen you do or be able to do. Yeah. And if you really kind of connect to those truths, I think you're gonna have a great career. So.
Very helpful. Thank you. So let's open it up. We've got, I think Greg is moderating the online questions. Katie's going to be our mic runner. So anybody in the room here want to ask Richard Bynum a question? Yeah, Nirav. And then, yeah, okay, we'll come back to that. Thank you. Nirav's one of my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Bynum. You know, my question is about responsible AI and banking. Mm-hmm. So banks are known to use historical data to create, to figure out patterns, to give how much loan to give, to whom to give, at what rate. And if this historical data is already based or is biased with human bias, mm-hmm. then the algorithm is going to give human bias as well. Mm-hmm. So companies, I feel, like banks should, I guess, audit their algorithms to ensure that there are no biases in current day loan giving and rates and so on. So what, in your role, is there anything you're doing to ensure that PNC is not, or PNC is auditing its loan giving algorithms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. So you have a lot of faith in financial services and technology. I would tell you that in a very general way, I can't speak for all banks, assuredly, and at PNC, I would tell you that we certainly have our eyes on what algorithms and AI can provide in terms of value. But we are amazing stores of information. There's no doubt about that. But we have probably just scratched the surface in terms of actually utilizing that information to make decisions. Fair Isaac scores, FICO scores, are probably the thing that most people are aware of that are judges of creditworthiness. And we use FICO scores like most in the industry use FICO scores. And there's likely bias in those scores. We sort of know that. Everyone sort of knows that. It's sort of equally unfair at the moment, and that's unfortunate, but that is true. I would tell you that there's a large conversation going on at the federal level with the OCC called Project Reach, and I'm not going to remember what Project Reach is right now, but what it stands for is to try to bring some of those barriers down and to provide access to capital and to credit by virtue of information that is in fact readily available, like your account balance. If you've had a paycheck come in every 2 weeks for the last 1,000 weeks, we're pretty sure you're going to have a paycheck come in next week. And so is there an opportunity to extend credit based on that history itself? Just scratching the surface of that today. At PNC, we're just beginning a conversation, but we're beginning it, I think, in the right place, inside of really looking around, not our industry necessarily, but other areas where AI is, maybe a year, 2, 5, 10 ahead of where we are, and thinking about the governance patterns that they have for both fairness and the moving of models and data through time, and how do you adapt and monitor those artificial intelligence efforts through time because things change, right? And we've begun that conversation. It's at the governance level in our company right now. I would say that rapidly it will move quickly, but the one thing that I can assure you of inside of financial services is that everything that we do is regulated extremely heavily, right? So there's never a notion of, at least in a traditional bank setting, of someone using an algorithm that has not been pressure tested against what a regulator would say is basic fairness and equity across our lending patterns. Now, I can't speak to those companies that would disintermediate themselves, get in between a bank and their customers. I'm not going to say any names, but there are companies who, as a matter of their model, come into your financial house. If you've asked them to get you something, they come into your financial house. They take a picture of everything in your financial house. They then store that picture, and they make a copy of the key that you've given them so that they can then come into your financial house every day to determine what's changed. Okay? And when they determine what's changed, then they can do something with that information. Those types of companies are much less regulated than banks. So I'll sort of leave it there, and I would say that there are a lot of open questions about what regulations there should be, and should they in fact be regulated at the same level of scrutiny that a bank like ours is.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it there.
Now, so as you see various other industries appearing, what's the right regulation, amount of regulation for which industry? Of course, this is a big conversation we're having now. Any of the students have a question, either here or from online? Yes. Okay, you want to? Oh, you were going to go, and then we'll come back to Mike. It's okay. It's all right. He's good.
Thank you. I hope I phrased this question properly, but you mentioned earlier that groups that are more diverse are able to produce better results than groups that are less diverse, which makes sense to me. But you also mentioned that if the group is not properly managed, then they could perform worse. So I wanted to ask if you have any advice or any strategies that you use to accommodate all the members of the diverse group while also encouraging diversity.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we do. So first of all, I think you've got to invest in your managers, right? By and large, if you talk to companies like ours, and if you talk to other companies, I think you will see, as we do, you'll see values around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think if you talk to CEOs and folks like myself who carry a C in front of our title, you'll hear us talking about wanting to drive for diverse outcomes. And then if you talk to the folks who are on the front line, you'll see them wanting for opportunities to move, and they'll be largely a very diverse population at the base of the pyramid. Where the magic is in the middle. The most important relationship in any company, period, is the relationship between a manager and their employee. And if we don't get that right, then all the rest of it, all the strategy won't work. All of the aspirations of those folks, they'll go somewhere else. So we focused a lot of intentions on equipping the managers with the tools that they need. And we've created a reporting capability so that those folks on the base of the pyramid can tell those managers and the bosses of those managers how they're feeling in terms of being included. Is my manager including me intentionally in our thinking, in our direction, in how our team performs and what have you? And look, we haven't solved all the problems of the world. But I think we have a lens on it probably better than we've ever had. And now we know through time trends. So if you're a manager who routinely gets feedback that you're not inclusive, well, now it's on that manager's boss to do something about that. And it's on that manager's boss to help change that behavior through either performance or compensation, right? And if their team gets a general trend of not being inclusive, then it's on that executive to say, what's going on that team? I need to dig deeper there. So it's a long game, right? You got to get data together for a couple of years. You got to get people to trust the process and the system. But I think it's sort of tuned toward good in that we will be able to have the managers that we want executing in the way that we want them to, which is to drive for a more diverse workforce. Now, that said, there's nothing that replaces someone in the manager corps reflecting the diversity you want as well. And by the way, that's racial diversity, that's religious diversity, that's LGBTQIA, whatever the case might be. That's accessibility as well. So I think you have to do what you say, and you have to monitor it through time. And if it's not working, then you have to abandon that course and come up with a better course to get to the outcome that you want in diversity.
I think part of the mechanism of what you're describing, and I'm thinking back to when you talked about the wallet on the windshield, does the diversity help us, and it should, to be better at seeing things from a different person's point of view?
Sure.
Because if you get, and that is something you can learn and you can get better at, and the more diverse a group you're in, the more it is almost required of you to get to do that.
Yeah, it's the only. I mean, I often go to because I'm a banker. I often go to the investment portfolio conversation. If you had an investor advisor who came to you one day and said, what you should do is put all your money on one stock. That's what you should do. Run for the hills, right? Because in all likelihood, you're going to lose a lot of your money. Right? And we would never take that advice. So why would we take it about people and perspectives and experiences and points of view and different dimensions that others could bring to the table?
It seems obvious, but it does. If you're in the habit of doing something else, you still have to kind of learn it. That's the thing. Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, the honest truth of it is, so the Federal Reserve of, I think it's St. Louis, does an amazing set of studies on, to move it into another frame, some of the gaps I talked about earlier, wealth gap, and so forth. And in their modeling, they've corrected for everything. They've corrected for education. They've corrected for parents' education. They've corrected for where you live. They've corrected for all of the sundry variables, anything you can think about. They've sort of corrected for the model. There's still this nagging, for the academics in the room, there's still this nagging R squared around a variable that they have undefined, right? I don't know what it is. What could it possibly be, right? So it's there. We know it's there. We live in a country where that exists, and we have to work our way around that, and people work their way around that every single day. So I think through time, I'm hopeful through time, obviously, that gets smaller and smaller. But we know today that the model will show that it's there.
For sure.
Right? So
for sure. Professor King. Oh, we've moved over. Greg.
Yeah, we have a few questions from our online audience.
They're ahead of you. Yes.
I'll start with, this one comes from Dr. Annie Green. She says that inequities have existed for many years, and there's also been data that addresses strategies on ways to fix it. How does digital intelligence and knowledge discovery play into your DEI strategy?
We just talked about that a little bit there. I think data is hugely important. In fact, when we started our Special Committee on Equity and Inclusion, which is a committee of our board, one of the early precepts from our CEO and from the chairwoman of the committee was that we wanted to be data-driven, right? So we literally comb through reams of data. We have a point of view about not only where are we diverse and how are we diverse, but kind of the psychographics around how our managers show up in moving diversity forward in the company. So it's not a question of data anymore. We kind of know where the data is. It's a question of what then strategies you can deploy against moving the needle on that data. So right now we are in a discussion about our diversity objectives. And our objectives largely have been based on the dimension of representation, right? So how many women are are core contributors versus how many women are senior leaders versus how many women are middle managers, that kind of thing. We'll continue to do that. I think we need to provide equal weight to what is the experience of those employees by virtue of the half dozen ways that we measure their level of comfort in our organization. And we haven't landed on the right set of measures yet, but we're working hard at it. I would imagine here in the next 60 or so days we will have a sense of that, and then we will manage the company forward along meeting those objectives. So I'm happy to say, for our representation objectives, we've met those over the last several years, and that's great. We'll need to keep meeting those as we go forward. In fact, with BBVA, now this is some 20% of our new organization. They were largely more diverse than we were as a function of where they were: Texas, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts in the Southwest. And so now our charge is, how do we keep that diversity that we've just accessed? And further, how do we make sure that diversity makes its way through our company, not just at the core contributor level, but also at levels of management? And look, we'll look at the data on a extremely routine basis, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and report about it internally and ultimately report about it externally.
Yeah, some of the best global firms, including HSBC, I don't know if they still do this, but it was about, making sure that you do move people around to kind of cross-pollinate, cross-connect. Greg, another?
Yeah, we have another one from the online audience. This comes from Lindsay Holmes. In your opinion, do you think that businesses and individuals have made more of an impact and a statement on social justice than the government has?
I think business has taken its place. I think in the conversation in a way that it never has before. Look, I don't think any one institution can solve the issues that we're confronted with. I think good people coming together around a table and having an honest and a safe conversation would solve a lot of ills. So I think business has taken its place at the table, and I think you're going to see that absolutely continue.
Okay. We're going to Rashid? Or to Mike. Okay, sorry. Mike and Rashid, and then we're probably.
The good news is I had quite a long time to regroup here because I had the same exact question as my esteemed colleague on the front row. Okay. So I'm going to go up to a little higher level here if I can. With a tremendous amount of, PR and news out in the world these days about corporate responsibility and ecological focus and sustainability, and, corporates really beating the media about that. How does your company take have a job come in, have a customer come in, whether it's a loan or an equity type investment that you do, and your company goes, you know what, we're not on the same playing field with this other company. They're not. And I may have the wrong word, green shadowings, where companies are talking a big game and not really doing anything. And of course, the oil industry is really getting beat up these days. But do you ever walk away from a deal at the down in the trenches, level, when there's a company, you just don't see how they are sustainable in this world?
Yes. And by the way, we're not alone, right? So there are banks that do this, but we have a process in place. It's part of our policies where for a number of reasons, so not just on the E, right, but also maybe on the S, that it will trip a risk escalation, and in escalating that risk, it actually comes up as a case in front of our executive team. I get involved, the leader of whichever business it is gets involved. We come together, we look at the set of facts, and we have said no to either a loan or an investment taking assets under management, and a variety of other things. Because it's the right thing to do, but it also happens to be good business. Again, one of my early mentors said to me, as I became a banker, are you getting paid for the risk that you're taking? That's really the question, at the table for us most of the time. And if you think about the risk that we would be taking on through the lens of an ESG for someone who is clearly outside of our policies or our guidance for this, then every dollar of revenue has to be sort of multiplied by a risk factor that neutralizes that dollar of revenue, which means we're going to lose money at the end of the day. So turns out doing the right thing, actually pays off, I think, in those circumstances. So the answer is yes. We have a well-documented process against it. If you look on our website, we have signed on and provide a task force on climate-related financial disclosures, which outlines the policy and speaks to how that gets accomplished.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Rashid.
Richard, thank you. Really enjoyed in the conversation before this and then obviously this session. I've got a very simple question. I mean, we had actually a speaker, last year in our business roundtable. They provide access to capital to minority communities. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there are multiple layers of inequity in our society, right? I mean, you can have access, but that access comes at a higher cost, right? So the comment was, okay, we have, you mentioned that 41% of the African American businesses failed. So this particular institution said, okay, we're going to open up and give them access to loan to basically, cover for their difficulties. But then they were charging 20% interest rate on that, right? Sure. So, and the rationale was, well, if they have, their option is to go to the credit card where they will pay 29%, so you give them the 25%. To me, that's not equity either, right? So is PNC doing something to think about that dimension? Because it's one thing to say, yes, we'll give you the money to borrow, but then borrow it at a higher rate. None of us would borrow money at that rate, yet we subject people to do the same thing.
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the benefits that I have in my world is I run our community development bank, right? So this is the bank, all banks have an element of this that historically has been responsive to the Community Reinvestment Act. And the thing about community development banking is that our hurdles are much lower. We're not trying to get a return on our capital. We're trying not to lose money, right? So no one wants to lose money, but the hurdles and the thresholds are much lower, and we can be a bit more creative in terms of financing. So all of the monies that I talked about, the $375 million last year, came through that dimension. And I can't tell you what the return that we get on that now is, but it's minor in consideration. Moreover, I'm a big believer in organizations called Community Development Financial Institutions, or CDFIs. So CDFIs, and we recently did some support for a new association of African American CDFI executives that's actually headquartered here in Virginia. CDFIs are in and of communities of color, primarily, certainly in and of low to moderate income communities. They're there for the mechanisms of providing capital to small business owners, but also individuals who are looking for a home in many cases. By the way, they were the hidden heroes of the Paycheck Protection Program that nobody ever really talks about. A lot of folks talk about the banks, and by the way, the banks, I think, did an amazing job of deploying with uncertain rules in an uncertain time in a rapidly changing environment. The community banks did a great job as well, but CDFIs did a magnificent job in putting capital at, in some cases, maybe the lowest levels of the economy to just keep, the lights on and the doors open in that fashion. So we deploy a lot of that capital through CDFIs because their lens is going to be much better than our lens, and their hurdle rates are going to be much better than any hurdle rate that I could, through a regulatory framework, deliver to the street. So that's one of the ways that I'm making sure that we're not talking about, Now, to be completely fair to whatever banker you were talking there, what they're talking about is risk-adjusted pricing, which is a thing. I got it. That's great. That's not what I'm talking about.
Richard Bynum, we've come to just about 8 o'clock, so I just want to thank you so much. I have really been looking forward to this, and you did not disappoint. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank our team for organizing here. I want to thank Bill and Brown & Brown for sponsoring us these 13 years and into an exciting future. Richard, a real pleasure. I wish we could have gone on longer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.